I'm Samantha Walker, 32, and I discovered I was my parents' backup child when I was 12. For 20 years, I lived in my younger sister Amanda's shadow, knowing I was conceived as insurance after her medical scare. Yesterday, sitting in the lawyer's office as my family celebrated Amanda's $50 million inheritance, I remembered their cruel laughter the night before. Sam will never marry anyone with real assets. I sat silently through their mockery, waiting for the final page of my grandfather's will to change everything. They never saw it coming. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Drop a comment below, hit like and subscribe, and join me as I share how my grandfather's final gift wasn't just money, it was justice. Growing up in our sprawling Connecticut home, I always sensed something was off about how my parents treated me compared to my sister Amanda. 5 years younger than me, Amanda seemed to walk on water in my parents' eyes. Every achievement of hers, no matter how small, was celebrated like she'd discovered the cure for cancer. My straight-A report cards earned a cursory nod, while her B- in math warranted dinner at her favorite restaurant. I was 12 when the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place. It was a crisp fall evening, and I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard my parents' voices drifting from the study. They were talking about Amanda's upcoming dance recital, but then the conversation shifted. "Thank God we had Samantha as backup," my mother Catherine said with a sigh. "Remember how terrified we were when Amanda had that medical scare as a baby? The doctors talking about potential complications." My father Richard laughed uncomfortably. "Best insurance policy we ever took out. Have another child just in case something happens to the first one." I froze in the hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe. The glass of water forgotten, I pressed my ear closer. "I know it sounds terrible when you put it like that," my mother continued. "But look how well Amanda's turned out. Such a special child. And Samantha's, well, she's fine, self-sufficient. Which is good since we've had to focus so much on Amanda's needs." "She's the practical one," my father agreed. "Not every child can be exceptional. Someone has to be average." I slipped back to my room, tears silently streaming down my face. It all made sense now why Amanda had private violin ballet and French tutors while I was told to join free clubs at school. Why her birthdays featured professional party planners and mine were afterthoughts. Why my parents attended every one of Amanda's soccer games but had work conflicts during my debate team finals. The only person who ever made me feel truly valued was my grandfather, William Anderson, my mother's father, whom everyone called Bill. A self-made businessman who built a commercial real estate empire from nothing, Grandpa Bill had a special fondness for me that confused my parents. "I don't know why Dad spends so much time with Samantha," I once overheard my mother telling my father. "Amanda is much more engaging." What my mother didn't understand was that Grandpa Bill and I connected on a level that transcended the superficial charm Amanda relied on. During weekend visits to his lakeside home, he taught me about investments, business, ethics, and self-worth. While my parents were pushing Amanda into expensive hobbies she'd abandoned months later, Grandpa was teaching me how to analyze stock reports and understand market trends. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Sam," he'd tell me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Most people want the flashy success, but real wealth, both financial and personal, comes from patience, integrity, and seeing what others miss." By 16, I was taking advanced placement classes and working part-time at the local library. Amanda, at 11, was being shuttled between private lessons that cost more than my college fund. When I achieved National Merit Scholar status, my parents' response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you know Amanda was selected for the Junior Regional Ballet Competition?" The pattern continued through high school. I graduated as valedictorian, earned multiple scholarships, and was accepted to Cornell's business program. My graduation party was a casual backyard barbecue where my parents spent most of the time telling relatives about Amanda's upcoming summer camp for gifted performers. The summer before college, Grandpa Bill invited me to his office in Boston. I'd never been there before, and I was intimidated by the sleek, modern building with his name on it. His executive assistant, Jessica Miller, greeted me warmly. "So you're the famous Samantha," she said, shaking my hand. "Your grandfather talks about you constantly." In his corner office overlooking the harbor, Grandpa handed me an envelope. "This is for your education," he said. "Your scholarships cover most of it, but this will handle the rest. No loans for my granddaughter." Inside was a check for $50,000. I gasped. "Grandpa, I can't accept this. Mom and Dad said—" "Your parents have made their priorities clear," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "I'm making mine clear too. Your education matters, Sam. Your future matters." I left for Cornell in August, watching from my dorm room window as my parents drove away, already discussing Amanda's upcoming dance showcase on their phone's speakerphone. I felt a strange mixture of liberation and loneliness. For the first time, I was free from being the backup child. But I also felt the ache of knowing my own parents considered me an afterthought. Little did I know that Grandpa Bill's support was just the beginning of a plan he'd been crafting for years, a plan that would eventually force my parents to confront the consequences of treating one child as precious and the other as spare parts. Balto. College became my sanctuary. At Cornell, nobody knew me as Amanda's sister or the backup child. I was just Samantha Walker, finance major with a minor in business ethics. My analytical mind and work ethic quickly caught professors' attention, and by sophomore year, I was invited to join a competitive investment club where students managed a portion of the university's endowment. During junior year, I met Ethan Hayes in my corporate finance class. Tall, with thoughtful brown eyes and a quiet confidence, Ethan wasn't like the flashy business majors trying to be the next Wolf of Wall Street. He was brilliant, but humble, the son of public school teachers from Michigan who, like me, was attending on scholarships and work study. "I liked how you challenged Professor Bernstein's assumption about the ethical implications of that merger case," he said after class one day. "Most people just focus on the numbers." Our first date was coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into a midnight walk around campus. With Ethan, I could talk about everything: my passion for sustainable investing, my relationship with Grandpa Bill, and eventually the pain of being the backup child. "My parents talk about Amanda like she's made of gold and I'm made of plastic," I admitted one night 6 months into our relationship. "When I call home, they spend 5 minutes asking about my classes and 20 minutes updating me on Amanda's life." Ethan squeezed my hand. "Their limitation, not yours," he said. "Some people can't recognize diamonds because they're too busy chasing glitter." After graduation, I was offered a position at Blackstone Financial in Boston, a prestigious firm where the starting salary made my parents finally take notice. Ethan received a job offer from a sustainable investment fund in the same city. We moved into a modest apartment together, combining IKEA furniture with weekend flea market finds. While I was building my career, Amanda was floundering. She'd attended an expensive performing arts college in New York, but dropped out after 2 years to find herself. This involved a series of short-lived passions, acting classes, a jewelry-making business that never launched a food blog with 3 posts. Each new venture was funded by my parents, who remained convinced that Amanda's big break was just around the corner. I maintained a polite distance from my family, calling once a week and visiting on major holidays. Each visit followed the same script: my parents asking cursory questions about my job, never my career, before launching into detailed updates about Amanda's latest pursuits. Meanwhile, my relationship with Grandpa Bill deepened. Now that I lived in Boston, we had lunch every other week. He was fascinated by my work in sustainable investments and often asked my opinion on potential business opportunities. "You've got the eye, Sam," he'd say proudly. "You see value where others don't." When Amanda turned 25, she met Alexander "Alex" Thompson at a charity gala my parents had paid for her to attend. Alex came from old money, managed a hedge fund started by his grandfather, and drove a car that cost more than my annual salary. Within 6 months, they were engaged. My parents were ecstatic. Finally, someone who can give Amanda the life she deserves, my mother gushed during one of our phone calls. When I mentioned my recent promotion to senior analyst, she responded with, "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Alex is taking Amanda to Paris for her birthday?" At Amanda and Alex's engagement party, which resembled a royal wedding. With its extravagance, my parents paraded around introducing Amanda as our daughter and me as our other daughter who works in finance. When some of Alex's colleagues expressed interest in my insights on emerging markets, my father interrupted to redirect the conversation to Amanda's plans to renovate Alex's Hamptons house. That night, as Ethan and I drove back to Boston, he asked, "Does it ever make you angry? The way they dismiss your accomplishments." I stared out the window at the passing highway lights. It used to. Now it just makes me sad. They're missing out on knowing who I really am. Grandpa Bill's health began declining the following year. At 78, he was still sharp as a tack mentally, but his heart was giving him trouble. During one of our lunches, which had moved from restaurants to his penthouse due to his limited mobility, he made a cryptic comment. "I've been watching Sam," he said, his voice weaker, but his eyes still bright. "All these years I've been watching and taking notes. The ledger doesn't balance yet, but it will." When I asked what he meant, he patted my hand. "Just know that I see you truly see you. And in the end, that's what matters." 3 months later, Jessica called me at work, her voice breaking. "Sam, it's your grandfather. He passed away in his sleep last night. I'm so sorry." The world tilted on its axis. Grandpa Bill, my champion, my mentor, the one person who valued me for exactly who I was gone. I sobbed in the bathroom at work, then composed myself enough to call my parents. "What a shame," my mother said after I broke the news. "Dad was always so vital. The funeral will have to be spectacular, of course. Amanda is devastated. She and Alex just asked Dad to invest in Alex's new fund last month. Even in grief, I was an afterthought." I took a deep breath, feeling Ethan's supportive hand on my back. "I'll be home tomorrow," I said, my voice steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. "We can discuss arrangements then." As I hung up, I had no idea that Grandpa Bill's passing would set in motion events that would finally force my family to see me, truly, see me for the first time in my life. So, the family home in Greenwich hadn't changed much over the years. The same sweeping driveway lined with manicured shrubs, the same imposing colonial facade with its perfect symmetry. Yet returning now with Grandpa Bill gone and Ethan's hand clasped tightly in mine, it felt like entering a museum of my childhood disappointments. My mother opened the door before we could ring the bell. Catherine Walker, at 58, remained elegantly preserved through rigorous skincare regimens and subtle cosmetic procedures. Her pearl earrings matched her cardigan, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Samantha, you're here," a brief perfunctory hug. "And?" "Ethan, was it? How nice." Then spotting someone behind us, "Amanda, darling, Alex, come in, come in." My sister and her husband had arrived simultaneously. Amanda, radiant in designer morning attire, accepted my mother's effusive embrace, while Alex handed his cashmere coat to the housekeeper. Neither acknowledged us until my mother prompted them. "Oh, hey, Sam." Amanda air-kissed my cheek. "This is so awful about Grandpa, isn't it? I was just telling Mom how he promised to help with our Aspen property renovations." Inside the house bustled with activity. Relatives I rarely saw milled about the living room picking at catered finger foods. My father, Richard Walker, broke away from a conversation with Amanda to offer me a distracted handshake. "Samantha, good of you to come." He nodded at Ethan. "Hope the traffic wasn't too bad." Before I could respond, he turned back to Amanda, who was regaling her audience with a story about Grandpa Bill attending one of her college performances. I knew for a fact he'd only gone because I was visiting Amanda that weekend and had invited him. Aunt Lillian, my mother's sister, approached us with a sympathetic smile. "Samantha, it's been ages. I hear you're doing well in finance." "She's a senior analyst at Blackstone." Ethan said, his voice carrying just enough for my parents to hear. Just closed a major sustainable investment deal. How interesting. Aunt Lillian replied, actually seeming genuine. Bill always said you had a mind for business. My mother materialized beside us. Lillian, have you seen the photo display Amanda put together? She spent hours collecting pictures of her and Dad through the years. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment alone. Jessica Miller was there, placing a tray of coffee cups on a serving platter. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. Sam, she said warmly, I was hoping to catch you alone. Jessica had worked as Grandpa's executive assistant for 15 years, but she was more than that. She was his trusted confidant, and I suspected the closest thing to a friend he had in his later years. How are you holding up? She asked, squeezing my arm. I miss him, I said, simply, the lump in my throat making it hard to elaborate. Jessica nodded. He talked about you constantly, you know. So proud of everything you've accomplished. She glanced toward the living room, lowering her voice. He had concerns about how things might play out after he was gone. We should talk privately before the will reading. Before I could ask what she meant, Amanda burst into the kitchen. Mom's looking for more wine glasses, Jess. Oh, and Sam Alex's parents just arrived. They're dying to hear about that little investment thing you do. The funeral the next day was exactly as my mother had planned it, elaborate, well-attended, and featuring Amanda prominently. She had insisted on delivering a eulogy despite having spent minimal time with Grandpa in recent years. Her speech focused mainly on childhood memories and how Grandpa had always seen her special gifts. I sat in the front pew between Ethan and Jessica, clutching a handkerchief Grandpa had given me years ago. My grief was a private thing, too raw and real for the performance my family had orchestrated. At the cemetery, as the polished mahogany casket was lowered into the ground, I felt Ethan's arm tighten around my shoulders. Through my tears, I noticed Jessica watching my parents and Amanda, her expression unreadable. The reception afterward was held at an exclusive country club where my parents were members. As waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, I overheard snippets of conversation. Bill Anderson's estate must be worth millions. I hear the granddaughter's husband runs quite a successful hedge fund. The will reading is next week, isn't it? I imagine most of it goes to family. Harold Green, Grandpa's longtime attorney, approached me as I stood alone by the window. A dignified man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, he had always treated me with genuine respect. Samantha, he said softly, my deepest condolences. Bill was exceptionally proud of you. Thank you, I managed. He meant everything to me. Harold nodded thoughtfully. The will reading is scheduled for next Friday at my office. Your grandfather was very specific about the arrangements. I'll be there, I said, though I harbored few expectations. Grandpa had already given me so much: his time, his wisdom, his belief in me. Whatever material inheritance came my way would be secondary to that. As Harold moved away, my father sidled up, lowering his voice. I hope you're not expecting too much from the will, Samantha. Your grandfather understood family priorities. The implication was clear. Amanda was the priority, always had been. I'm not expecting anything, Dad, I replied truthfully. Grandpa already gave me what matters most. He looked confused by this, then shrugged. Well, good. No disappointments then. He glanced across the room to where Amanda was holding Court Alex by her side. Your sister's taking this very hard. She and Bill had such a special bond. I bit back the urge to correct this fiction. Instead, I excused myself and found Ethan, who was chatting with Jessica near the bar. Ready to head back to the house? I asked. As we drove to my parents' home where we were staying for the week, Ethan reached for my hand. You okay? Not really, I admitted. Everyone's already dividing up Grandpa's estate in their minds, and all I can think about is how I'll never have another lunch with him. Back at the house, we found Amanda and my parents in the study glasses of expensive scotch in hand. Sam, Ethan, my mother acknowledged us. We were just discussing the will reading next week. $50 million at least, my father said, swirling his drink. Bill's real estate holdings alone are worth that, not counting investments and liquid assets. Amanda giggled, leaning into Alex. Daddy says most of it will come to me, of course. Grandpa always wanted to secure my future. And with Alex's new investment fund, my mother added, "You two will be set for life." I felt Ethan stiffen beside me. "We should get some rest," I said quietly. "It's been a long day." As we turned to leave, I heard Amanda stage whisper, "Should we invite Sam to Aspen when we renovate? I mean, it would be Grandpa's money paying for it." My mother's reply followed us up the stairs. "Let's see how things play out. You know your sister. Always so practical about money, probably expecting a little something herself." In our guest room, Ethan paced angrily. "Do they even hear themselves? The way they talk about you like you're some distant relative rather than their daughter?" I sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "They've never seen me, Ethan. Not really." I looked up at him, this man who had stood by me through everything. "But Grandpa did. And you do. That's enough." Little did I know that the coming week would test that conviction in ways I couldn't imagine, and that my grandfather had left behind far more than just money. The week crawled by in a haze of forced politeness and thinly veiled excitement from my family. Amanda and Alex extended their stay, canceling meetings and appointments to remain in Greenwich until the will reading. My parents transformed into the perfect hosts, ensuring Amanda and Alex had everything they needed, while Ethan and I were treated like obligatory house guests. "We've moved your things to the small guest room," my mother informed us upon arrival. "Amanda and Alex have the blue suite, of course." The blue suite had been my childhood bedroom converted to a luxury guest room after I left for college. I hadn't been surprised to find my adolescent possessions boxed up in the attic years ago, while Amanda's room remained a shrine to her accomplishments. By Thursday evening, the night before the reading, the anticipation in the house was palpable. My mother had arranged a family dinner that felt more like a pre-celebration. Crystal glasses and fine china adorned the dining table, and a bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket. "Is Jessica joining us?" I asked, noticing the table was set for 6. "Jessica?" My mother looked puzzled. "Why would Dad's assistant join our family dinner?" I bit my tongue, not bothering to explain that Jessica had been more family to Grandpa in recent years than his own daughter had been. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. My father uncorked the champagne as we sat down, pouring generous glasses for everyone. "A toast," he announced, raising his glass, "to Bill's memory and to new beginnings." "To Grandpa," Amanda added, her eyes glittering, "who always knew what was best for the family." I sipped my champagne silently, watching my sister and parents exchange knowing glances. The 4-course meal progressed with conversation, centered entirely around what Amanda and Alex would do with their anticipated windfall. "The Aspen property needs a complete overhaul," Amanda explained, twirling pasta around her fork. "We're thinking of adding a guest house and indoor pool. And the investment fund," Alex added smoothly. "With proper capitalization, we could double the initial investment within 5 years." My father nodded approvingly. Bill would have appreciated that kind of growth. Always had an eye for returns. I caught Ethan's eye across the table. His expression reflected my thoughts. My family had already spent Grandpa's money in their minds. "What about you, Samantha?" Alex asked suddenly, his tone condescending. "Any big plans with your portion?" The pause made it clear he assumed any inheritance I received would be minimal. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Samantha's always been sensible with money. I'm sure she'll put whatever she receives into some boring index fund, right, dear?" "Actually," I said quietly, "if Grandpa left me anything, I'd honor his legacy by investing in businesses with strong ethical foundations. That was important to him." My father chuckled. "There's practical Samantha. Always overthinking things." After dinner, Ethan and I excused ourselves early, citing the emotional toll of the week. In truth, I couldn't bear another minute of their presumptuous planning. "I need some air," I told Ethan once we were upstairs, "and maybe some water." "Want me to come with you?" he offered. "No, I'll just be a minute. Try to get some sleep tomorrow will be intense, regardless of what happens." I padded downstairs in my slippers, heading for the kitchen. As I approached, I heard voices from my father's study. Amanda, Alex, and my parents. their tones relaxed and loose from the wine and champagne they'd consumed all evening. "I still can't believe Sam showed up with that boyfriend," Amanda was saying, laughter in her voice. "What does he do again?" "Something with tree-hugging investments. They're perfect for each other," my mother replied. "Both so ordinary." "At least Samantha has a career," my father added. "Not that she'll ever make real money as an employee. Not like you and Alex." "She's just the backup kid, Dad," Amanda said dismissively. "The insurance policy that thankfully you never needed to cash in." My breath caught in my throat. They knew I'd overheard them all those years ago. Had it been a family joke all this time? "God remember when she was born," my mother continued. "We were so worried about Amanda's heart condition that we decided we needed a backup, just in case. And then I was fine," Amanda laughed. "So you got stuck with boring Samantha. Poor you." "Poor Samantha," Alex corrected, his voice smug. "She'll never marry anyone with real assets. That Ethan guy probably has student loans bigger than their apartment." They all laughed at this, the sound piercing me like physical pain. "We should give her something from the inheritance," my father said, trying to sound generous. "Enough so she doesn't feel completely left out. 20,000, 50. Out of 50 million? Amanda snorted. "Sure, throw her a bone. She can renovate her little apartment kitchen." "It's what Dad would have wanted," my mother agreed. "He always had a soft spot for Samantha, though I never understood why." "Probably felt sorry for her," Amanda suggested. "Living in my shadow all those years." I stood frozen in the hallway, tears streaming down my face. The casual cruelty, the dismissive tone, it was worse than anything I'd imagined. In their eyes, I wasn't just less important than Amanda. I was barely a person at all. Just a backup plan that had become an obligation. I must have made a sound because the conversation in the study suddenly stopped. Quickly, I retreated up the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Ethan was sitting up in bed when I returned one look at my face, telling him everything. "What happened?" he asked immediately, pulling me into his arms. Through broken sobs, I recounted what I'd overheard. Each word seemed to make Ethan more outraged. "That's it," he said when I finished. "We're leaving, tonight. We'll get a hotel and come back for the reading tomorrow. You don't need to spend another minute in this house." For a moment, I was tempted. The thought of sleeping under the same roof as people who could talk about me that way was almost unbearable. But then I remembered something Grandpa Bill had told me years ago. Sometimes, Sam, the most powerful position is to stay perfectly still and let others reveal themselves. "No," I said, wiping my tears. "We stay. I want to be here in the morning when they pretend none of this was said." "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, concern etched on his face. "I'm sure. Besides," I added, thinking of Jessica's cryptic comments and Grandpa's final words to me, "I have a feeling tomorrow might not go exactly as they expect." Just then, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jessica. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember your grandfather saw everything clearly. Justice will be served. Sleep well, Sam." I showed Ethan the message, a strange calm settling over me, despite the pain still raw in my chest. "What do you think she means?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But Grandpa always said the best investment strategy was patience. I guess tomorrow we find out what he was investing in all these years." As I drifted into a troubled sleep in Ethan's arms, I couldn't have imagined just how dramatically my family's certainties would be upended in less than 12 hours. Harold Green's law office occupied the entire top floor of a historic building in downtown Boston. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the harbor where Grandpa Bill had begun his real estate empire 50 years earlier. We arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, the time specified in Harold's formal invitation. My parents, Amanda and Alex, had insisted on driving separately, barely acknowledging Ethan and me as we entered the elegant conference room. "Perfect timing," Harold said, rising from behind a massive mahogany table. "Please, everyone, take a seat." My mother immediately steered Amanda to the chairs closest to Harold, with my father and Alex flanking them. Ethan and I settled at the far end of the table, the physical distance mirroring our emotional separation from the family. Jessica was already seated near Harold, a stack of folders in front of her. She gave me a small, reassuring smile. "Before we begin," Harold said, his voice formal, "I want to thank you all for coming. William Anderson was more than a client to me. He was a friend of 30 years. His final wishes were extremely specific, and I am bound by professional duty and personal promise to execute them exactly as directed." My father nodded impatiently. "Of course, Harold. We all want to honor Bill's wishes." Harold opened the thick leather portfolio in front of him. "This last will and testament revokes all previous wills and codicils. It was executed 6 months ago with William of completely sound mind, as attested by 2 physicians and a psychiatric evaluation included in the documentation." My mother frowned slightly at this unusual detail. "I'll begin with the standard provisions," Harold continued. "To his household staff, William has left generous severance packages equivalent to 5 years' salary each. To his business partners, he has assigned his voting rights in their joint ventures according to the schedule attached as Exhibit A." Harold turned a page. "Now to the distribution of his primary estate valued at approximately $50 million after taxes and excluding certain segregated assets I'll address momentarily." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Amanda sat up straighter, her hand finding Alex's. "To his granddaughter Amanda Walker Thompson, William leaves the sum of $50 million. Amanda let out a small squeal, clutching Alex's arm. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father nodded as if this merely confirmed what he had always known. "However," Harold continued, his voice cutting through their celebration, "this bequest comes with conditions." The smiles around the table faltered. "The $50 million will be held in trust administered by BlackRock Fiduciary Services, an independent trustee with no family connections. Amanda will receive quarterly distributions of interest and a portion of principal according to the schedule outlined in Exhibit B." "A trust," my father interrupted. "But that's unnecessary. Amanda and Alex are perfectly capable of managing their own finances." Harold looked at him steadily. "These are William's explicit instructions, Mr. Walker. The trust is irrevocable." Amanda's face had paled. "But how much access will I have?" "We have plans for that money. You will receive approximately $500,000 annually, adjusted for inflation," Harold explained. "Major expenditures outside that allowance must be approved by the trustee according to guidelines William established." Alex looked like he'd been slapped. $500,000 a year from $50 million, that's just 1%. The remainder is to be responsibly invested to ensure the longevity of the trust," Harold replied calmly. William was quite concerned about preservation of capital. My parents and Amanda exchanged dismayed glances. Their champagne dreams of unlimited wealth were evaporating before their eyes. "Furthermore," Harold continued, "the trust stipulates that none of these funds may be used to capitalize Alexander Thompson's investment fund or any business venture in which he has a controlling interest." "What?" Alex exploded. "That's outrageous. Bill and I discussed this investment opportunity extensively." Harold remained impassive. "William left a personal letter explaining his decision on that matter. You'll receive it after this meeting." My mother turned to me, accusation in her eyes, as if I somehow had orchestrated this restriction. I maintained a neutral expression, though inside I was reeling. Grandpa had seen through Alex's charming facade to the opportunist beneath. "Now," Harold said, turning another page to Samantha Walker. I felt Ethan's hand close around mine under the table. "To my granddaughter Samantha, whom I have watched build a life of integrity and purpose, despite challenges that would have broken a lesser spirit, I leave the following. First, the sum of $8.5 million to be transferred directly to her without restrictions or conditions." Gasps echoed around the table. My father's mouth actually fell open. $8.5 million, my mother repeated incredulously. That's... Secondly, Harold continued, as if there had been no interruption, I leave Samantha my controlling interest in Anderson Sustainable Ventures, the private equity fund I established 3 years ago with an initial capitalization of $15 million, now valued at $22 million. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled in Ethan's steady grip. Thirdly, I leave her my personal residence on Beacon Hill, along with all furnishings and personal effects contained therein, with the exception of specific items designated for other beneficiaries. Harold looked up at me, a gentle smile softening his professional demeanor. William added a personal note here. Sam, you recognize the true value of our time together. This home holds memories worth more than its considerable market value. May you fill it with a family who understands what really matters. Tears spilled down my cheeks. The penthouse on Beacon Hill wasn't just valuable real estate. It was where Grandpa had taught me about investments over chess games, where we'd shared Sunday dinners and honest conversations. This is absurd, my father sputtered. Bill wouldn't have left Samantha more than Amanda. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, Harold said firmly. In fact, William anticipated your reaction. He extracted a sealed envelope from his portfolio. He instructed me to read this letter aloud if his distributions were questioned. Breaking the seal. Harold unfolded several typed pages and began to read. To my family, if you are hearing this, it means you have questioned my decisions regarding my estate. Let me be perfectly clear. Every provision in my will reflects my careful observation and consideration over many years. Catherine and Richard, I have watched with growing disappointment as you consistently favored one child over another, treating Samantha as an afterthought, while indulging Amanda's every whim. I heard you refer to her as your backup child, a term so callous it defies comprehension from loving parents. I established the trust for Amanda not to punish her, but to protect her from the consequences of the entitled attitude you fostered. The restrictions are designed to encourage financial responsibility and independent thinking. As for Samantha, I have secretly mentored and tested her financial acumen for years. The investments she recommended during our discussions outperformed market indices by an average of 11% annually. She has earned every dollar I've left her through her integrity, intelligence, and resilience in the face of your persistent emotional neglect. My hope is that this will begins the painful but necessary process of rectifying the imbalance you created in your family. Money cannot heal emotional wounds, but perhaps it can correct the practical disadvantages Samantha has faced as your backup plan. With love and the hope for genuine reflection, William Anderson. Silence descended on the room. My mother had gone pale, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth. My father stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Amanda looked shell-shocked, while Alex's expression had transformed from outrage to calculation, no doubt already planning how to access my newfound wealth since Grandpa had blocked him from Amanda's. Harold carefully refolded the letter. There are additional details regarding the estate distribution, but those are the primary provisions. I have individual packets prepared for each beneficiary with the complete documentation. Jessica stood and began distributing heavy folders to everyone at the table. When she reached me, she squeezed my shoulder gently. Your grandfather asked me to give you this as well, she whispered, placing a small velvet box beside my folder. Privately, I opened it beneath the table. Inside was Grandpa's pocket watch, the one he had carried every day of his business life, its gold case, inscribed with his personal motto, "See the value others miss." Beneath it was a handwritten note, "Time reveals truth. You've always been my first choice, Sam." Fresh tears blurred my vision. Across the table, my family remained frozen in varying states of shock and disbelief. For 20 years, I had been the afterthought, the contingency plan, the practical one who would never need the advantages they showered on Amanda. Now, Grandpa Bill had forced them to confront the consequences of those choices. As Harold concluded the formal reading, I finally understood what Grandpa had meant about balancing the ledger. He couldn't change how my parents had treated me, but he could ensure I had every opportunity they had denied me, and more importantly, that they would have to acknowledge the truth they had spent decades ignoring. The backup child had just become impossible to overlook. "Chat, this is completely unacceptable," my father declared the moment Harold finished speaking. His face had progressed from pale shock to mottled anger. Bill was clearly not in his right mind when he made these arrangements. Harold's expression remained professionally neutral. "As I mentioned, William underwent comprehensive cognitive testing before finalizing this will. The documentation is ironclad." "We'll challenge it," my mother said, her voice shaking. "This distribution it's perverse. It goes against everything Bill would have wanted for his family." Jessica, who had remained silent throughout the reading, finally spoke up. "Actually, Mrs. Walker, this distribution is exactly what Bill wanted. I worked closely with him for 15 years, and he spent the last 5 meticulously planning this estate distribution." My mother turned on her with surprising venom. "You're just the help. What would you know about what my father wanted for his family?" "Catherine," Harold cautioned, "Jessica was appointed as executor alongside me. William trusted her implicitly." Amanda, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly pushed back her chair and approached me. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the fury and confusion in her eyes. "What did you do?" she demanded, leaning over me. "How did you manipulate Grandpa into this?" Ethan started to rise, but I placed a hand on his arm. This confrontation had been 20 years in the making. I wouldn't hide behind anyone else. "I didn't manipulate him, Amanda," I said quietly. "I just spent time with him. I listened to him. I valued him for who he was, not what he could give me." "That's such bull," she spat. "You must have poisoned him against me, against all of us. The Sam I know would never have the spine to stand up for herself otherwise." That cut deep, not because it was true, but because it revealed how little my own sister knew me. "The Sam you know," I repeated, rising to meet her gaze. "Amanda, you don't know me at all. You've never tried to know me. I was just the backup kid. Remember the insurance policy Mom and Dad never needed to cash in because you turned out fine." Amanda stepped back, her eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you last night." I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion churning inside me. "All of you laughing about how I was just conceived as a backup in case something happened to precious Amanda. How I'd never marry anyone with real assets. How you planned to throw me a small bone from the inheritance so I wouldn't feel completely left out." My parents exchanged horrified glances. "You were eavesdropping," my mother asked weakly. "I was getting a glass of water," I corrected her. "But this isn't the first time I overheard the truth about my place in this family. I was 12 the first time I heard you call me the backup child. 12 years old, Mom." My father attempted damage control. "Samantha, you're taking things out of context. We never meant—" "Stop." I interrupted, 20 years of suppressed truth finally breaking free. "Just stop. You meant every word. My entire life I've been treated as an afterthought. My achievements were footnotes, my needs secondary, my future an obligation rather than a priority." I turned to Harold. "Did my grandfather know about them calling me the backup child?" Harold nodded solemnly. "He did. Jessica overheard a similar conversation at Amanda's college graduation party 5 years ago and felt compelled to inform him. It catalyzed many of his estate planning decisions." "This is ridiculous," Alex interjected, his businessman facade cracking. "We're discussing a family misunderstanding, not the distribution of millions of dollars. There must be a way to revisit these allocations." Harold shook his head. "The will is legally binding. William was very thorough." "Thorough indeed," Jessica added, sliding a thin folder across the table to my parents. "This contains transcripts of various conversations recorded at family events over the past 5 years, with William's knowledge and in accordance with single-party consent laws. They document a pattern of favoritism and emotional neglect that William found deeply troubling." My mother's hand trembled as she opened the folder. He spied on us." "He documented the truth," Jessica corrected. truth you all seemed determined to deny. I hadn't known about the recordings, and part of me was shocked at how methodical Grandpa had been. Yet another part recognized that this meticulous attention to detail was exactly why he'd built such a successful business empire. He gathered evidence-analyzed patterns and made decisions based on facts, not emotions. Samantha. My father said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Surely we can discuss this as a family. Whatever issues we've had in the past, we're still your parents. We still love you. The words rang hollow after decades of evidence to the contrary. If you loved me, I replied softly, you wouldn't have made me feel like a contingency plan instead of a daughter. You wouldn't have dismissed my achievements while celebrating Amanda's mediocrity. You wouldn't have called me boring, practical, ordinary, all code words for not special enough to truly matter. Amanda flinched at mediocrity, but remained silent. What do you want from us? My mother asked, tears welling in her perfectly made-up eyes. An apology. Fine, we're sorry if you felt overlooked. If I felt overlooked, I repeated incredulously. That's not an apology, Mom. That's shifting the blame to my perception rather than your actions. This is getting us nowhere, Alex interrupted, ever the pragmatist when money was involved. Perhaps we could discuss a more equitable redistribution. Samantha, surely you don't need both the $8 million and the investment fund. We could arrange a private agreement outside the will's provisions. Ethan, who had been quietly supportive throughout, finally spoke. Are you seriously trying to negotiate after what we just heard? After your wife and her parents spent decades treating Sam like she was worthless, and you personally mocked her last night. Stay out of this, my father snapped. This is a family matter. Ethan is family to me, I said firmly. The kind of family that supports, respects, and values me for exactly who I am. Harold cleared his throat. If there are no further questions about the will itself, I suggest we conclude this meeting. Each of you has the complete documentation in your folders. Jessica and I are available for follow-up questions, but the terms as read are final. I gathered my things, including Grandpa's pocket watch and the substantial folder detailing my inheritance. I think we're done here. Samantha, wait, my mother called as Ethan and I headed for the door. You can't just walk away. We need to talk about this. I paused, turning back to face my family one last time. I've been talking or trying to talk for 20 years. You weren't interested then. The only difference now is that Grandpa made sure you can't ignore me anymore. So that's it. Amanda asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. You take the money and cut us off. Prove you're just as materialistic as you've always accused us of being. The question gave me pause. Was that what I wanted? Complete severance from the people who, despite everything, were still my family? I don't know what happens next, I answered honestly. But I do know that any relationship moving forward has to be built on truth, not the convenient fiction you've all maintained about our family dynamics. And what truth is that? My father challenged, though his usual authority had deflated considerably. That I was never a priority. That I was conceived as insurance, raised as an afterthought, and valued only for my utility. That no achievement of mine could ever measure up to Amanda simply existing. That's the truth you've never had the courage to acknowledge, even to yourselves. The silence that followed was deafening. Come on, Ethan said gently. Let's go. As we stepped into the hallway, Jessica followed us. Sam, wait. There's something else your grandfather wanted you to have. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. He asked me to give you this privately after the reading. He said it wasn't about money, but about perspective. I thanked her, tucking the envelope into my bag. Whatever message Grandpa had left me, I wanted to read it somewhere peaceful, not in this building, still echoing with confrontation. Ethan and I had almost reached the elevator when I heard footsteps behind us. My parents and Amanda were hurrying down the hallway, Alex trailing reluctantly behind. Samantha, please, my mother called. Don't leave like this. We can work this out. We're family, my father added, the words sounding strange from his lips after years of treating me as anything but. I studied their faces. My mother's careful composure, cracking my father's authoritative mask, slipping Amanda's confident facade, replaced by genuine uncertainty. For the first time in my memory, they were seeing me, truly seeing me, as a person with power and agency. "I need time," I said finally. "This isn't about money. It's about 20 years of feeling invisible in my own family. That doesn't get fixed in a 5-minute conversation in a hallway." "But we will talk," Amanda asked, vulnerability I'd never seen before, crossing her face. I nodded slowly. "Eventually, but on my terms, not yours, for once." As the elevator doors closed between us, I felt a strange lightness. Grandpa's final gift hadn't just been financial independence, it had been the power to finally stand as an equal in a family that had always made me feel less than. "You okay?" Ethan asked, squeezing my hand. "I'm not sure," I answered truthfully, "but I think for the first time I might be ready to find out." Tuss. 6 months passed like a dream and a lifetime simultaneously. Spring bloomed across Boston, bringing with it a sense of renewal that matched my inner transformation. The penthouse on Beacon Hill. Now my home with Ethan had become a sanctuary rather than just valuable real estate. We'd kept most of Grandpa's furniture, but added our own touches, photographs of our travels, Ethan's collection of vintage maps, and the reading nook I'd always wanted but never had space for in our apartment. The financial aspects of my inheritance had taken time to process both emotionally and practically. After careful consideration and consultations with advisors, I trusted I'd established Walker Sustainable Investments, combining my expertise with the seed capital Grandpa had left me. Our mission was simple: invest in companies that created positive social and environmental impact alongside financial returns. Jessica had joined as my chief operations officer, bringing her organizational brilliance and intimate knowledge of Grandpa's business principles. We'd started small, but focused, quickly developing a reputation for thorough due diligence and ethical standards that attracted clients who shared our values. My relationship with my family remained complicated. After giving myself space to process the revelations of the will reading, I'd agreed to family therapy sessions, not because I owed them reconciliation, but because I needed closure for my own healing. The first session had been excruciating. My mother had alternated between defensive justifications and tearful apologies. My father had struggled to articulate emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. Amanda had veered between resentment over the trust restrictions and genuine remorse for her role in our fractured relationship. Dr. Eleanor Bennett, our therapist, had gently but firmly guided us through the painful terrain of family dynamics established decades ago. "The pattern I'm observing," she'd noted in our third session, "is that Catherine and Richard created a family system with assigned roles: Amanda as the special one who needed protection and celebration, and Samantha as the practical one who needed to be self-sufficient. These weren't conscious decisions, but they created profound consequences." My mother had broken down then, admitting something she'd never acknowledged before. "When Amanda was born with that heart murmur, I was terrified we would lose her. The doctors said she'd likely be fine, but I couldn't shake the fear. When I got pregnant with Samantha, it felt like insurance. And then when Amanda thrived, I think I resented Samantha for reminding me of that fear, for being the physical embodiment of my moment of weakness. It wasn't a justification, but it was the first honest explanation I'd ever received for why I'd always felt like an afterthought. It didn't heal the wound, but it helped me understand its origin. Amanda's trust restrictions had forced her to confront realities she'd been sheltered from her entire life. $500,000 annually was still an extraordinary privilege, but it meant she couldn't impulsively buy vacation properties or fund Alex's increasingly desperate investment schemes. Their marriage had cracked under the pressure. 2 months after the will reading, Amanda had moved into a condo in the city, filing for separation after discovering Alex had been pursuing other wealthy women as potential investors. "He never loved me," she'd admitted during a rare one-on-one coffee meeting. He loved what I represented access to family money. When that got restricted, I wasn't valuable to him anymore. I'm sorry, I'd told her and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my sister to experience that kind of betrayal. She'd looked at me with newfound respect. You chose better. Ethan loved you when you had nothing. It was the first genuine compliment she'd ever given me about my life choices. Today marked another milestone in our journey. Ethan and I had invited my parents and Amanda for dinner at the penthouse the first time we'd hosted them in what had been Grandpa's home. As I arranged flowers in the dining room, Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. Nervous? He asked, kissing my temple. A little, I admitted, but ready. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. My parents stood awkwardly in the hallway, a bottle of wine and a bouquet in hand. Amanda arrived moments later, looking both familiar and changed her designer clothes more subdued, her makeup lighter, her smile less practiced. Dinner was not the strained affair I'd feared. Conversation remained careful but civil. As we discussed neutral topics, a museum exhibition, Amanda had visited my father's recent retirement plans, my mother's new book club. After dessert, I invited them into Grandpa's, now my study. The rich mahogany shelves still held his books, but family photographs now included ones of Ethan and me alongside the vintage pictures of Grandpa with his parents and grandparents. I wanted to share something with you, I said, retrieving the envelope Jessica had given me after the will reading. I've been waiting for the right moment. Inside was a letter and a small key. Grandpa's words had brought me to tears the first time I'd read them, and they still moved me deeply. My dearest Sam, if you're reading this, the will reading has concluded, and you've discovered what I've long known, that you possess not just financial acumen, but extraordinary resilience of spirit. The assets I've left you are substantial, but they pale in comparison to what you've already built a life of integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. The true wealth in this world isn't measured in dollars, but in how richly we love and are loved in return. I watched with pride as you overcame the subtle and not so subtle message that you were somehow less than. I observed with admiration as you built success through merit rather than entitlement. And I noted with joy when you found in Ethan someone who values the treasure of your authentic self. The enclosed key opens the wall safe behind my portrait in the study. Inside, you'll find journals I've kept throughout my business career. They contain not just investment wisdom, but life lessons I've learned often the hard way. Consider them another form of inheritance, one that money cannot buy. Your parents and sister may struggle with the provisions of my will. They may resent you, blame you, or suddenly discover your value now that financial calculations have shifted. How you respond is entirely your choice. Reconciliation requires genuine change on their part, not just regret over consequences. Remember this above all. You were never a backup plan in my eyes. You were always first string starting lineup MVP. The world may take time to recognize a diamond among rhinestones, but that doesn't diminish the diamond's value. Build something meaningful with what I've left you. Create the family you deserved but never had. And know that whatever choices you make, I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. All my love, Grandpa Bill. I looked up from the letter to find my mother wiping tears from her eyes. My father staring at his hands, and Amanda watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something like regret mixed with respect. He really loved you, Amanda said quietly. He loved all of us, I replied. But he wasn't willing to pretend unhealthy family dynamics were normal or acceptable. And neither am I, not anymore. My father cleared his throat. Samantha. Sam. I know we've started this process in therapy, but I need to say it directly. I'm sorry. We failed you as parents. Not just in actions, but in the most fundamental way we failed to see you. My mother nodded, unable to speak through her tears. I was jealous, Amanda admitted suddenly. Even before the money. You were so capable. so complete in yourself. I always needed validation, attention, praise, but you just quietly excelled without requiring any of that. I think that's why I worked so hard to keep the spotlight on me. I was afraid if they really saw you, they'd realize I was the lesser option. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd believed I was lacking something essential that made Amanda special. Now I understood that my independence born of necessity, when parental attention was focused elsewhere, was actually strength. "Where do we go from here?" my mother asked, hesitantly. I considered the question carefully. Forward, I hope, but slowly and with honesty as our foundation. I don't want to discard our family, but I won't accept the old dynamics either. "That seems fair," my father acknowledged. As they prepared to leave later that evening, Amanda lingered behind. "The trust restrictions," she said. "I hated them at first, but they forced me to figure out who I am without Dad and Mom directing everything without Alex's influence. I'm taking classes at Boston University now. Psychology. I think I might want to work with children who feel overlooked." I smiled at the symmetry how Grandpa's plan had created opportunity for both of us to become more fully ourselves. After they left, Ethan and I stood on the terrace, overlooking the twinkling lights of Boston Harbor. His arm around my waist, he asked, "How do you feel?" "Peaceful," I realized with some surprise. Not because everything's resolved, but because I'm not carrying the weight of being the backup child anymore. That was their narrative, not mine. 2 weeks later, Ethan proposed on that same terrace with a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who, like my grandfather, had valued substance over appearance and authenticity over pretense. As we planned our wedding, small, meaningful, focused on celebrating genuine connection rather than social performance, I thought often about the foundation we were creating for our future family. Our children will never be backups or replacements or insurance policies, I told Ethan one night as we finalized guest lists. They'll be valued for exactly who they are. "That's the real inheritance your grandfather left you," Ethan observed. "Not the money or property, but the template for loving people authentically." He was right. Grandpa's most valuable bequest had been showing me that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to see and speak truth, the wisdom to recognize genuine value, and the capacity to love without conditions or comparisons. Being the backup child had forced me to build my own foundation of self-worth independent of parental validation. That foundation, it turned out, was unshakable, strong enough to support not just my own healing, but potentially a new chapter in our family story. As I placed Grandpa's pocket watch in a display case in our bedroom, see the value others miss, visible through the glass, I thought about how life's most painful experiences often contain the seeds of our greatest strength. The backup plan had become the primary path. The overlooked child had become impossible to ignore. And the family that had once defined me by what I wasn't was slowly learning to see me for who I truly was. Have you ever been treated as less than in your own family? How did you find your self-worth despite others' perceptions? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through challenging family dynamics. Thank you for walking this journey with me, and remember, your value isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it.